Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Career Revolution podcast. My name is Licia Dewing, and I'm a career strategist. And I 100% believe that big ideas for careers start small, and very often they start here on the podcast. Today's guest, Andrew Macdonald, is a seasoned people leader that has spent his career supporting teams and businesses throughout Sub-Saharan Africa and working in a number of different territories. He has a passion for sourcing and developing talent and enhancing the employee experience. Andrew and I have been connected on LinkedIn for a number of years. In fact, I haven't actually looked at how many years, but it certainly is a number of years, and we've not actually met. But Andrew shared a really interesting post that completely piqued my attention. And as a result, we've had some conversations, and here he is on the podcast. So without any further ado, I'm going to welcome and add Andrew to the stage. Hi, Andrew.
Good morning, Licia. Great to be with you this morning. Thank you.
I'm excited for you to share some of the stuff that we were getting into and talking about pre this episode and the recording. And just for everyone who's going to be tuning in and listening, let's set the stage. We're going to talk about all things AI and the employee experience of CVs and cover letters and how people are rightly or wrongly using the tool. We're also going to talk about passion and purpose and impact and how important it is to understand that and anchor yourself in that. And yes, we're going to find some time to talk about your career journey and the relevance that you have to share with us around keeping yourself one sort of foot in the consulting world. You've got a company, Augment HR, where you've been doing small consulting work with over a number of years in your career, but formally right now, you're head of talent for a really interesting company, Discover Africa. So let's start with a little bit of an introduction from you in terms of your broad career and HR experience, because as I said in our prep call beforehand, I celebrate the fact that not only are you a people leader with deep depth of the full HR industry and realm, but you've moved through a number of different industries, you've moved through a number of different territories, and you've also moved from permanent employee to fractional to contract to back into permanent. And I think that keeps you as an HR professional so incredibly relevant with the candidate pool, with the employee, hiring process and market.
Oh, thank you for your very generous introduction.
That's the thing about being on a podcast is you always get a generous introduction. I'm glad it was generous for you. Tell us about your career journey, Andrew, but lead up to why you posted that post that you did that caught all of our attention.
Yes, a good place to start, I think. Having joined Discover Africa Group in February this year, I was the first senior people HR leader appointment for the company, and as part of their growth trajectory and supporting the existing leadership team and the company growth and expanding the team with some really key hires during the first quarters of 2025. So these spanning junior, mid, and senior level this year. So what has fascinated me was the number of applicants who are just not getting the basics right. And often, from my personal perspective, I'm really open to looking at transferable skills from different sectors, different roles, and not highlighting that, and having, done this for quite a while, I'll make a certain degree of inference and often give candidates the benefit of the doubt in the shortlisting process and the screening process. But I can only do that to a certain degree. So there's that, not highlighting the skills and abilities for the role you're applying for, not getting your grammar right, spelling right, capitalizing, like really the basics that you don't even need Grammarly for. You can just, usually your Outlook or your Gmail will correct your spelling, for example. And then, and you touched on AI. And I think it's such a phenomenal tool that can be leveraged and add so much value for someone who is applying for a role, looking at pivoting their career, but using it wisely and with the right intent. And what I was finding is that you'll have applications that are so closely tied to the job advert, for example, it almost becomes transparent. Because it's quite evident. And what's quite unfortunate then is that might get them past the first hurdle or the second hurdle. But when you're either having a conversation with me in the screening process or with the hiring manager, that's when it's very clear that they don't actually have the skills or abilities for the role that they're applying for, which I think is fortunate. And I think that's the energy that they're putting in could perhaps be redirected, leveraging the tools, getting the insight, getting the advice, and upskilling for the role you want to apply for, or perhaps pivot around which actually role or company you want to apply for. So that is sort of more broadly speaking inspired the post that I just wanted to share. And I've had these moments in my career previously. There's been an opportunity to speak to an audience and just get the basics right. Often people are thinking at a much higher level and more strategically, which is needed, and it needs to be intentional around that. But let's get the basics right first, especially for those who are at the entry point of their career, those sort of applying for the junior mid-level roles, 2 to 5 years experience. It was very concerning that the basics, what you and I would consider the basics, they don't get them right.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've worked on a couple of graduate and intern recruitment programs, preparing graduates, helping them with, how to put I refer to it as career collateral. CV, LinkedIn profile, career narrative, it's all part of it. The career narrative has to be anchored in really understanding and knowing yourself so that, yes, you can use your CV and your LinkedIn profile to speak to those elements. And I also know that for somebody to post something on LinkedIn, it's not just because you were sort of, what am I going to share today? In fact, you haven't posted much on LinkedIn. I'm going to reprimand you, and I'm also going to encourage you and say, clearly there's a reason why you wanted to share that post. You took to LinkedIn because it was a concern for you, but then also you were seeing that there's a lack of education, which astounds me, because I mean, this is the hill that I will quietly lie down on one day and die on. And it's about getting your career collateral, knowing yourself, career identity. So it both fascinated and absolutely shocked me, because as a profession, in the profession of career strategy, helping people figure out what they need to do and then getting the right career collateral in place, as you say, basic info, really basic info. So I mean, there's a whole thing of what was going on behind the missteps there. And I think we can show a sense of understanding potentially to the fact that there's a lot of CVs that somebody might be sending out. But that doesn't absolve you from not getting, as you say, punctuation, basic spell check and things in place. And where you're hiring junior, you're not necessarily hiring entry level. These are people who've definitely been in the workforce, in the workplace. They should have known this. So I resonate with the frustration, but I celebrate that you took to LinkedIn. I celebrate that you wanted to use this as an opportunity for just a reminder, but basic level education too. The element on AI, I think, is fascinating, because isn't it exciting for us all to be able to lean into what this exponential technological shift in the world is allowing us? And I saw something recently which completely resonated with me, and it was about what AI is doing is it's giving the individual, the freelancer, the work from home person, the consultant, the solopreneur, or the person who's looking to pivot and change, huge tooling to be able to lean into this massive resource that would not have ordinarily been available to us, that big organizations would have had access to. Every single individual has it. And I talk a lot about, taking responsibility for your AI literacy and your AI journey and so forth. Tell me more about your thoughts from an HR perspective of how you would like to, if you could write the guide on what's the best way of using AI. Clearly, everyone's going to be using it. I mean, I'm seeing recruiters, external recruiters saying on one job, 300 applicants and every single CV fits the bill. Every single CV fits the bill. What AI has done for an external recruiter has really created a bottleneck around everyone looks good on paper. Whereas before there was that opportunity of seeing, well, these 20 people understand the role, these 100 and however many don't. Now everybody seems to understand the role, but what you're saying is that the tool is being used to get through the first hurdle of being shortlisted or what have you, but then there's this long list of all the wrong people who aren't internalizing what they've put on their CV. Are you able to give us more of a specific example and talk a little bit more around that and what you would suggest somebody should use AI for on their CV or not?
Indeed, no, with pleasure. So a couple of thoughts come to mind, and I think, and it's interesting, example you cite around, you're now having so many, so many apparently ideal candidates in your applicant pool. Meanwhile, so I think having a good understanding, from an HR recruiter perspective, making sure you have a good understanding of the industry or sector that you're recruiting for, and a deep understanding of your business, the hiring manager needs. And I think what's been helping me, for example, in this recent period of intense recruitment is having worked in the travel and tourism sector for a number of years, knowing a fair number of our competitors, of adjacent companies or adjacent industries, and that can add value in terms of how you start screening. In terms of leveraging the tool, for me, making sure that your own voice comes through is so important. I think that authenticity of tone, you can read that quite clearly. I think with a lot of these LLMs, the language can be a little bit generic, and yes, the more you use it, it can pick up on your style to a certain extent. But I think when you are from an HR perspective or recruiter perspective, when you are looking at resumes day in, day out, you start to pick up these phrasing trends and the layout trends. You sort of you can almost spot it right away when you've looked at about 1,000 CVs.
And I mean, that's the thing. Sorry, just to interject there, is that it's wonderful that you've got this tool that can then read your CV, read the job description, pull it together, but it's doing that for everyone. It's doing that for the world en masse. So your language is not unique unless there's a specific prompt, unless you're crafting your agent to speak specifically to you. So there is that sort of depth of how to work with it and how to understand it. Thank you for mentioning that, because it's about, and it's the candidate, it's understanding that whole recruitment process, that you're one of many, 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 many CVs, one of many, many, many applicants for exciting, desirable roles. Doesn't mean that it should be difficult or hard, or there should be any resistance for you moving through, but it's that authenticity. So authenticity and understanding the tool that you're using really are the keys that the two key things that you're saying here. You did say to me that you think, you're talking about cover letters. What's your feeling about using AI to write a cover letter? Because that came up because you shared that you were reading identical cover letters from different people. Isn't that fascinating?
Exactly. Absolutely. And again, I think that's just using an AI tool in a very cursory way. And I think instead of, what my inference is that instead of writing a cover letter in your own voice and maybe sense checking it through a ChatGPT or another tool, to get a few prompts or phrasing suggestions, almost as if, they're just saying, here's the job ad, my CV, as you mentioned a moment ago, write this cover letter, which makes it very, very generic. So for me, making sure that, it's written in your own voice, your own style, by all means, you can sense check certain elements. An anecdote sort of comes to mind. I had a brief stint, a short contract at Heineken last year in the talent acquisition space, and I was presenting our graduate program at UWC and to a full lecture hall of very eager students, and at the end, with the Q&A session, again, asking about advice around applying and how can their applications stand out and use of AI. And I simply said, write your own cover letter. even if my personal view, even if it's not 100% beautifully articulated, if the phrasing or style is not exactly as it should be, I'd rather have something that's 90% acceptable, but your authentic voice can be read through that cover letter. That's so much more valuable than having what is starting to look like boilerplate application letters or cover letters from an LLM. So for me, I think that is so important. And I think the authenticity helps you stand out. And I think for me as well, the extra effort that a candidate goes to in their application also makes a very positive impression. And not that I'm advocating for every job seeker to start reaching out to to people at the company they're applying for, but I think if there's people within your network, socially or through LinkedIn, and making an effort to directly or indirectly reach out, or at least highlight your application, also shows, okay, you're not just applying to 20 roles this week. It's a case of it gives an indication to me that there's some intentionality behind your application. There's a reason why you would like to come and work at Discover Africa Group, as opposed to another company in another sector even. So it's almost these small micro signals that can have quite an impact. Well, at least for me, I think when in my role, leading the people team and the function for Discover Africa Group, and having to hold the culture for the organization to a large part. I think there's a bit of intentionality, and that's, for me, I'm quite hands-on throughout the recruitment process. And something else that sort of not sort of directly related to this question, but I think part of the introduction is that for me as well, and you mentioned around, I know I should be posting at least once a week on LinkedIn, so maybe this will be some motivation or inspiration to do so moving forward. But usually it's when I feel quite passionate that I'd like to share or highlight. And I think for me, whether you're a candidate at Discover Africa Group, whether you're somebody who wasn't successful, who's leaving the organization or leaving a process, I would like them to step away as an ambassador for the company, an ambassador for the brand.
So essential, so important, Andrew, to be able to have.
Example, if they can take.
I think there was just a little bit of a blink in the reception there, so we lost the last end. You were talking about stepping away as a candidate, whether you were successful or not, as an ambassador for the brand. So this employee, well, it's employee experience once they're hired, but it's candidate experience as they come through the recruitment process. And I really, again, celebrate that from an HR perspective, you're thinking about people before they've even become your people. You're thinking about the market, the talent of what would their experience be. And I love that you're seeing it from whether you're successful or not, you're going to walk away with a sense of, I had a great experience with Discover Africa. I wasn't the right fit, or I didn't get the role, but my experience was good, because you and I and everyone listening to this have all been on the wrong side of that employee experience. We've all had ghosting, hurry up and wait, 711,000 interviews, and then absolutely nothing, or tell send me your pay slip, and then no response back, or we've hired, all the wrong things. So we do. Perhaps there needs to be a name and shame. No, I'm not saying that. Name and shame of companies that do it wrong. But that is revolutionary. I mean, employee experience, when we talk about culture, just the words employee experience are relatively new in the life cycle of the world of work. And that to me is phenomenal, that this wasn't even something that we considered. 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Now it's the buzzword that everyone's speaking about, because once you get someone in, it's so you want to keep them because they're talent. You don't want to lose them to the competitors. You want to keep them. Really interesting and so exciting. So to your question about, is this going to be the motivation for you to continue to post on LinkedIn? Yes. And anyone listening to this, please, let's give a big thumbs up to Andrew. We need more of your thought and more of your perspective. And just the bit that you said before that around when you're really passionate about something, you'll take to LinkedIn, and that's evident when we look at your profile that you some years back shared some interesting thoughts around COVID and the work from home scenario that we were all forced into, and goodness knows how we've evolved since then. But let's talk about that and identifying that passion, because clearly you're in tune with what it is that's important to you in the function and the work that you do. It's about your people, and the title that you have is so suited and befitting to the passion that you're sharing with us on LinkedIn. Talk to me about that, because I've had lots of lovely conversations with wonderful people in organizations and even in HR, and they'll say, well, passion is great, but get a hobby. Work shouldn't be passion related, or purpose is fantastic, but I mean, you need to work for us and then you can go and find your purpose. So it's interesting how that even in itself has done a little bit of a life cycle and a 360. 12 years ago, when I called myself a career strategist and started my work, I said, you can have a career that you love. And it was it was an empty stage that I was standing on then. It beautifully has become a lot more populated. And I love that a rising tide lifts all boats. And whether we're in HR, external recruitment, or a career strategist, we're all kind of in the same room of helping people understand that they do need to find what it is that makes them unique, their authentic voice, and finding passion. But what are your thoughts on that from your perspective?
Yeah. So my first comment is you were clearly a pioneer.
Checks in the post, Andrew. Checks in the post.
It's been a bit of a journey for me, I suppose. My first more than a decade of working in HR was for large corporate multinationals in the oil and gas industry, and it was an incredible foundation for my HR career. Though I feel that my learning and career trajectory took off. I was when I left the industry, it was in turmoil and the oil price had tanked, and I had led multiple restructurings and retrenchments until I had done all of that needed to in Africa, and then I had to bow out. But that moment for me was a point of reflection. And that started my consulting journey over the subsequent 6 years or so. And having worked for these large organizations, having consulted for startups, for nonprofits, worked with really passionate founders, it gave insight into the realization that the work that you do, the organization you work for, the work that they do, the product they sell, the service they provide, there can be resonance with your personal values, with what you find value in as a professional and in your personal life. And the organizations I've worked for, there usually be an element of the organizational purpose, the product they sell, the service they provide, that resonates with me. And it can be about the work, even if the organization, certain companies you can get really excited about, others less so. But if the piece of work, the people that you're working with, what you need to deliver on that project can be quite inspiring. And if it links to what you find value in as a professional, that's where you can start finding that purpose and that passion within your day-to-day work. So for me, the employee experience, the candidate experience, finding and developing talent, seeing that talent grow and develop through the structures, frameworks, processes that you design, implement, and support as time goes by is a really rewarding space to be in. And I feel very privileged that I've worked by and large for organizations where that has been the case. And whilst the consulting work has given an incredible breadth of experience across sectors, across geographies, as you mentioned kindly in my introduction, and I've worked in many countries in Africa, lived as an expat, and the experience has all added up to not just what's in my toolkit, so to speak, but around the perspectives that I now hold around the role of HR or people within an organization, and the responsibility you have as well. And I suppose, yeah, sort of my sharing on LinkedIn and what precipitated or inspired this conversation is the fact my thoughts and concerns are not just about the team or the company I'm responsible for, but more broadly within the talent marketplace. And there's a degree of reciprocity, the fact that hopefully, there'll be a potentially phenomenal candidate who reads that post, to updates their profiles, who applies for the job, and I have a new phenomenal team member in the coming months.
Yes.
So there could be some side benefit, but it's perhaps a little bit more altruistic than just that. So where I am at the moment, and coming back into a full-time permanent role, again, it was around the alignment of values and purpose of the organization in terms of what they want to do for tourism and for Africa and conservation, and as well as the value they place in their team members. I don't think that I've heard mention of the word employee. Everyone's a member of the team. No matter what department you're in, we're all part of one team within the company. And the fact that I was brought in as quite a senior resource quite early on in the growth trajectory of the business, again, speaks to the value that's placed on the role that I'm in, as well as on the current and future members of the team.
Fantastic, wonderful, and I absolutely celebrate that without a doubt. So we've spoken through a number of different things, a number of different elements. We're rounding up to near on the end, but I know that there are people listening going, well, okay, good advice around the AI. I need to be a lot more authentic, and I need to really take my time with my application and do some research and think about the role and think about the opportunity. I'd love, if you're open to it, to just talk a little bit about your specific career journey, because what's interesting is that, yes, you've had this sort of consulting, contract, fractional, and permanent employee, yet you've still got your one kind of finger on the consulting button. And there's this element around that relevance that I think is so exciting, because something that I advocate all the time, it doesn't matter whether you're employed full-time on the payroll with benefits or whether you're a consultant invoicing the company. We are all in response. We are all, we should all own our career, whether it's our AI literacy and growth thereof, or whether it's really our personal branding and career collateral. At no point do we kind of just give it all over and go, now I'm permanently employed, because then we start losing our relevance. Yes, permanency comes with loyalty and being a part of the team and building towards something. And those are all good things that are baked into the culture and the leaders, prescribe. But the essence of being relevant, being responsible for our own growth, being responsible for our own development, not waiting for the company to prompt it. That's what I've been sharing and talking about within my community, my clients, for a number of years, because when we do it, it creates a sense of the sort of, we assume the sense of being the buyer of our career. We're positioning ourselves as the buyer mentality or the entrepreneur mentality within the organization. We are businesses. Our brands are a business. We need to consider where is the best way that we can grow and be relevant, whether that's a monthly paycheck, whether that's a fractional paycheck. What are your thoughts around that? Because it specifically does represent some of your journey and what you've advocated for, knowingly or not. And I wonder whether you're going to share some of that on your LinkedIn posting.
No, indeed, a few inspired thoughts to follow. Watch this space. If on reflection, I've always been open to whatever opportunities come my way, even if they weren't necessarily ideal or what I'd anticipated. And I always reflect and take away learnings from that experience. It's a growth experience. And whether it was wildly successful or only moderately so, it adds to your toolbox. It adds to experience. It adds value to your career. So the diversity of opportunity in the consulting space, I think, adds so much value to your personal and professional profile. And when looking at candidates who have that diversity of experience, for me, you start moving up the shortlist for a
Yes.
role, because it shows that you haven't been at one organization for 10 or 15 years. You've worked in different sectors, different size companies. It demonstrates an adaptability and agility. And you're always learning, and you're getting exposed to different processes, different frameworks that you can draw on as you move forward in your career. And when looking for opportunity, be it permanent or consulting, it gives you a lot more to leverage and lean into in terms of what you're going to showcase for that potential opportunity.
Absolutely. And as we round off, Andrew, we did chat and you had some specific kind of career revolution tips that you wanted to share. They were along the lines of always being open to opportunity, always saying yes. And I know they had something to do with you were sharing the sort of the power of mentors and value of mentors. Anything that you want to add or just expand on those as we end off, please?
With pleasure. So again, always say yes. So you can figure it out. You can upskill. You can learn. You can properly leverage those AI tools. You have the ability. You have the potential. So be open to what comes your way. And when I touch on mentorship, I've had the privilege of many fabulous, inspiring mentors. Some for a shorter season, some for a longer season. And many of those mentors have not been within the industry necessarily, has not been within HR. And I think having a mentor that sits outside of your vocation, outside of your sector, can give some very interesting perspectives. You don't just want to be ensconced in your HR bubble. You want to be able to speak to somebody who's far more commercially minded, who has sat on Exco in the marketing space. I think the leadership lessons, the coaching lessons, the mentoring lessons that you can get, not just for yourself, but that you can then pass on to others, for me has been really, really valuable. And that's I've always sought out from when I first started in my early 20s through to this day, having those mentors that you can reach out to. And some you might speak to once a month, some might be once or twice per year. But I think maintaining that network of professionals that you can draw on, for me, has been really valuable. And I think for those who are looking at enhancing their current role, wanting to take the next step in their career or pivot altogether, for me, that would probably be if it's the one thing that the audience takes away today, would be that.
Absolutely. And thank you for reverberating that, because that's without a doubt the one thing we have control over in our career. We can control who we know, who we grow our relationships with, who we connect to, and who we continue to grow our network with. We can't control whether the rand is up and down, the dollar's going here, whether the oil's in or out of Africa, as you say, but we can control who we connect with. So thank you so much, Andrew. You've shared so many truth bombs, so many interesting perspectives, and I really appreciate how openly you've been in sharing. And we're all going to be here now as your witness to follow you on LinkedIn. So we look forward to some more posting and a lot of interesting conversation thoughts that you've touched on. We might get you back. I think we might have to do a part 2 later on in the year to just sort of touch. Thank you. Touch base. There's nothing like asking you like in public. So I've got the evidence of that. But really, Andrew, all jokes aside, it's been a great conversation. The audience and the listenership of the Career Revolution podcast is really just what we've shared. What's going to help people move forward, your perspective, your career, and it couldn't have been more perfect and more spot on. So thank you so much. Time for us to say goodbye. We're on 35 minutes, which is a record, which is great. And just some great opportunities to connect with you. We'll be sure to follow you on LinkedIn, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you very much, Andrew.
My pleasure, Licia. Thank you.